Alright, are you guys ready for a road trip? Because we are hitting the road, going somewhere to check out something pretty dang cool. So one of my personal favorite amps is the Dynamis by Rev, and it's actually an amp that they stopped making quite a few years ago, and they have finally brought it back. Now I have the original one right here. A little 40-watt beast. Oh, what does it sound like? It sounds like this. So go ahead and fast forward 8 years or so from when I got my original Dynamis. What do we have here? The D40, the new version of the Dynamis at last. Now this one was designed by Dan, again over at Rev, but he had a lot of input from Shawn here in Nashville, and I think that Shawn has amazing hands, amazing ears, so I was really excited to try this amp, and I thought, why don't we go over to Shawn's house, have him play it a little bit on some real mics. You guys are always asking me, the two-note stuff, amazing. For a guy like me who mainly records without mics, I love it. But a lot of you guys want to hear it on mics, and I know Tubbs is a really big mic guy, so we're going to go over to his house. He's going to talk about some of the design process of the amp, and you're going to hear a good guitar player for a change, instead of hearing me play the same old power chords and pentatonic licks that you always do. So anyways, let's hit the road, and let's go see what Tubbs is doing. And the awesome people at Sweetwater were nice enough to sponsor this video, so if you would, check those links down below. Shawn lives a little ways from me, a little over an hour, so we're going to venture down there, but a really good way to support these videos is just by clicking the affiliate links down below in the description. Also, before I forget, make sure you check out Shawn's channel. I'll link it down below for you. Tons of inspiration over there as well, so check that out. So anyways, now let's go. Yeah. Also, we made it. We're here.
Yeah.
This is it. That's Shawn. We're just right in.
Yeah.
So, this is your D40.
Yes.
And this is the one. I mean, you had a lot to do with this, with the development of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Dan. You know, this is Dan's baby. I just basically gave input. You know, but at the end of the day, he executed the whole thing. It was just me saying a little more of this, a little less of that. Can it do this? Should it do that? You know, what are our goals? Where do we want to point this thing dynamically within the range of rev amps? That was a big part of it. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Dan built that thing. I was just around to pester him a lot.
Well, you did such a good job with it, because the original Dynamis is like my favorite amp the Rev has ever done. So when there was like the D40, I was like excited and also kind of like skeptical. I'm like, I like the original one so much, but you took it with Dan in like a whole new direction. Yeah, well, that was the thing, because I demoed the D40 and I loved it, but at the same time there were things about it where I felt like, oh, if we're gonna, you know, and this was before I was actually working for the company, I felt like, well, if there's something we could change, I still feel like Channel 2 is a bit modern, and I felt like Channel 1 could be a little bit more open and have even more headroom. And that was the whole thing, because I connected with that amp too. But if you want to point over here, it was also the Generator 740. There was an openness to that amp. Now that amp is once again a little bit too, I shouldn't say it's a little bit too modern, but within the range, that was the thing that kind of woke me up. I was like, well, wait a second, the 740 has this big openness to it, and that's what got my wheels spinning. And then of course, once Dan and I started discussing, hey, what's the next, you know, Dynamis 740, it was like, oh, okay, well, here's, you know, in my mind was a little bit of the 740 in the openness, but I wanted like
more vintage, especially on that drive channel. I didn't want it to be quite as modern. I wanted it to be, you know, a departure. And yeah, Dan was so gracious to like sit through all my rambling.
Well, it's good because Dan's so good at, you're good at articulating the sounds of what you want it to do, and then Dan is great at executing it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, with Dan, you know, a lot of it with Dan too, he's like, okay, play it. So once I was out in Canada and working with him, that was the thing. He's like, play and tell me what it is you do like and what it is you don't like, and I want to hear more about what you don't like. But play. And that's the thing I could articulate to him. It's like, well, you hear that high mid frequency, or do you hear this amount of gain, or I want this type of bloom. I don't want it to be super tight, but there's too much sag. You know, all of that, you know, he just put up with me, basically, you know, badgering him.
Which you guys had already done the pedal together.
Absolutely.
So he knew what he was getting into.
So he was used to my thing, but at the same time he was just crazy patient. He would just, we'd go through something and he'd have an open chassis in front of him, and he would steal that chassis away and be like, I'll be back in 15 minutes, and then there's the new tweak, and then we would just go through that. So yeah, it was, you know, super enjoyable for me to just have somebody of that caliber that knows how to do it, just saying, yeah,
in real time,
let's try that. Yeah. And then he could push back and say, okay, well, within that circuit, this isn't going to be viable, and here's why, but here's a compromise. And then I would hear that compromise and be like, oh yeah, I never even thought of that. That sounds great. So yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of process.
It's just very collaborative.
Yes, very. Yeah.
And all that. So
there's your sync. So you have it.
Sync it up.
Sync it up.
Sync it up.
I don't think I played that right. Anyways.
Sync it up. All right, so we're D40.
Yep.
Into, so what is the delay or reverb I'm hearing?
You're hearing reverb off the amp. The delay you're hearing,
Shawn, this is the stuff that people want to know.
It's that thing.
Oh, well, that explains it.
Yeah. But you can't hear it anyways. Honestly, I've got it turned down so low. It's minus 22 right now.
Okay.
Very subtle. The majority of what we're hearing is the reverb off the amp. We're using my Chandler Limited TG2 right there.
Okay, what's that doing for us?
That's the mic preamp.
Okay.
So we're running into an ISO box that's in the garage that I painstakingly built. I should say my friend painstakingly built.
I have to say, Chris deserves credit.
Yeah, Chris Justice, while I drank coffee. And yeah, so anyways, that's what's out there. It's a Bogner 2x12 that I've had for years and years and years now. That's pretty much my baby. That's what I use on the mics. Right now, it's an R10 and an SM57. Normally, there would be a 122 out there. That being said, the reason I'm using an R10 out there is I'm still kind of sussing out how crazy it's going to be climate-wise out there.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a really expensive ribbon mic, and the thing is, the R10 is a really nice sounding mic, and it'll take a lot more abuse. So honestly, that's why I'm using an R10. So right now we're on the crunch channel. I can go to the clean channel. I've got it dialed so it'll break up a little bit. I can make it so it doesn't. I prefer a little bit of break.
Yeah, I'd say, do you like super crystal clean?
If the producer is handing me a check and asking for that, then yes, I do.
Yes, I do. I love it.
That's my favorite thing ever. I've spent a lifetime, figuring that out.
I mean, just plug direct. You know, what do you want?
Exactly. So, if I want it to be cleaner, I can definitely make it so that now we're not breaking up at all. And that's the nice thing about this amp. I can go from that to basically, without really touching any EQ, if I want it to sound fatter, so I guess to help explain what I'm doing, if I want it to just sound fatter with a little bit more breakup, that's way fatter than...
Yeah, let's see the dials here.
Yeah, so like right now, this is like a fatter tone.
So we're on the clean channel.
Yes. And that's because this is a Les Paul, I'm on the neck position, darker pickup, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I'm doing is I've added the bright switch and the boost. I can shut both those off and make it even crazy cleaner. But because it's a Les Paul, I want that bright switch on. And then the boost is just kind of making the amp sound more pushed.
So when you and Dan were doing this, what made you guys decide on 40 watts? Because that always seems like such a sweet spot. Well, that's for amps.
Yep, and 40 watts will always, anywhere between like that 35, 40 watt range is just the sweet spot for, I think, most amps, especially for guys that want to play on stage, but also want to work at home. What we were kind of torn about was tubes, because the original Dynamis was 4 6v6s, right?
Yeah.
We wanted to kind of move away from that into 6 L6s, right? Which are way more efficient, but that was the problem. For me,
there's such a sound.
Yes.
That's what I like so much about the original Dynamis.
The 6v6 amp was the thing that was like, you know, for me it's like, oh, 6v6 is a quad set of 6v6s. It just feels so great. Therein lied the dilemma. It's like, we want to go 6L6, but I want it to have some of that 6v6 thing.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, and Dan, you know, is a magician at sorting that type of stuff out, because I was actually kind of skeptical. I thought, oh man, this amp's going to be too stiff. It's gonna...
That was my concern whenever Derek was telling me about it. I'm like, oh, you're going completely away from it.
Yes. Well, and the thing is, we did want more headroom. You can only drag so much headroom out of a quad set of 6Vs, and you're going to be in that 30 range, and that's, you can run them hotter, but at the end of the day, that's about where you're going to sit. So we go 6L6, we've got way more headroom, but now we have to make sure it still, you know, feels like a 6v6 amp, or not exactly like, but has kind of the remnants of that that whole the parameters of like a 6v6 amplifier. I can go ahead and start turning up the channel master, which is going to drive the next tube harder. Now it's going to start breaking up. Now, for me, I love that. Just very, what's the word I'm thinking of? Organically.
Organic.
Terrible word. I mean, guitar players are so sick of that word. But it is. Well, I guess I should say it's very intuitive too. Once you understand.
It's very amp-like.
Yeah. Sounds like an amp. So amp-like. Is that a tube amp? Sounds so amp-like.
It sounds so much like an amp.
But that's the thing. It's like there's so much. You know, that's the crux of, especially on the clean channel. That's what Dan and I dealt with the most. Was, this is, you know, this sounds great, but can it do this? What if it gets fatter here? Within this circuit, if it gets fatter, then what's the compensation? It's like, oh, okay, well, we've got tons of room to move on the EQ, but we haven't even touched that. We're just working on input and basically master level and channel. So you can drive the next stage harder by turning up that channel master. That's going to create a certain dynamic and gain. If you want it to be cleaner, then you can turn down the front, turn up the channel, or you can go the other way. There's just so many variations just on that channel.
Okay, so now we're going to hop over to channel 2 on the amp. And one thing that's fascinating to me, just hearing Shawn talk about this stuff, is obviously how detail-oriented Dan and Shawn both are about things. And I think whenever you're at that like higher caliber of player, designer, all that kind of stuff, they just hear things differently. They think about things that guys like me just don't think about. So to me, that's the point of this video. Like, I just think that all this stuff is very fascinating, and we should probably get back to the video. Yep. Is that real? Are you miming? Is this fake?
This isn't a watch.
Is this
okay,
fake?
I'm gonna go really slow. Watch.
Wow.
Okay.
He did it twice.
Yep, did it
It's
twice.
real.
Yeah, so you can do that via foot switch, obviously. but yeah, that's how it works. Obviously, I'm sitting right next to the transformer side of this amp. So pickups don't like to be next to transformers.
Means it's real.
Yep, yep.
Really? So what channel took you guys the longest to kind of figure out?
They both took a minute. I would say it was pretty even.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, because the clean channel, you know, as we had discussed earlier, it was really the feel with 6L6 tubes was a big deal. The overdrive channel was a booger. I made it a booger. Dan was totally cool. I made it a booger because it was the same thing. It was like, how can we make it so it's just essentially a single channel drive channel? So there's no aggression modes, there's no drive modes. You had drive modes on the early amp. For me, I was like, well, how can we just have more of a kind of straight through circuit that doesn't have any necessarily drive modes or aggression modes? It's all basically, let's dial the EQ. What we want this amp to do is be kind of a departure from the modern rev thing.
Approach, which I think it is.
The start point for me, super dynamic. If I play clean, but if I really dig in, it's going to bark, but at the same time it's going to have just a little bit of sag, but it's not compressed, because that was another thing Dan and I worked on quite a bit, was natural amp sag as opposed to created compression are two different things.
Yeah.
And I really didn't want it to sound like, oh, it's compressed. It's like, no, I need it to...
Well, it just sounds so big, you know.
Yeah, yep. So, I mean, that's kind of the start point. And then if I want more top end, I can hit the bright switch. Now we're kind of creeping into more of like a plexi top end. Pretty bitey.
That's the sound I like so much right there.
And I can shut the verb off, but yeah, the... And then if I want it to sound bigger with a little more gain, I can just hit the boost without touching my tone stack. Shut that back off. So yeah, so you can keep cranking gain. Like I can leave the boost on, we can turn the gain up, I'm immediately going to turn the bass almost off. Now we've got quite a bit of, I mean, there's fur on that for sure. So even what I was just doing there, it's like everything on this amp is a tone control. So for me, I was like, okay, it's getting a little bit woolly. When I totally crank the gain, oh, where's my channel master at? If the channel master is super hot, then that's going to create low end as well. So turn the channel master down a little bit. It's not going to take away your volume completely, but it will tighten things up.
Right.
So that's a big part of how this circuit works.
Well, cool. Well, thanks for showing that all to us,
Oh, man. Thank you for coming down and like putting up with this little tiny room. And
oh, it's great. Yeah, it's so horrible. I'm surrounded by guitars and amps. Ugh, I can't believe you
dude playing a Les
me.
Paul out of tune.
I was in traffic forever. It took about 3 hours to get home. Man, that was brutal. But we made it. Just a great, great day. Big old shout out and thank you to Shawn for spending the day with me. Shawn is, as you can tell, a terrifyingly good guitarist, but he's just a better person even than that. So thanks to my buddy Tubbs for hanging out with me all day, showing so much, kind of like revealing what's behind the curtain of designing an amp. And yeah, I think that's going to be it. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you to Sweetwater for sponsoring the video. I hope that you enjoy these more in-depth look videos. I still want to do the real simple kind of meat and potato, hang out, check out a piece of gear, do a lesson, that kind of thing. But I also want to do more of the story behind some of this stuff. You know, I've had the Dynamis amp now 8 years or whatever it was, and I thought it was kind of cool that they finally came out with a new one. I'm like, well, let's do a video and Shawn's here. What if we talked about the process behind, you know, redesigning an amp? So hope you enjoy that stuff. A lot more stuff at Glazier's. I want to go to Novo and record a guitar being built. So many cool things are going to be going on. So anyways, we're wrapping up 2023. I appreciate you guys all so much. If you would, hit the subscribe button. And yo, I said that really weird. Hit the subscribe button. And I'll see you all later. I don't have a guitar right now in my hand, so we're going to end this jazz hand style. Woo!